Good to be here with you today. My name is Tim Tracy, and I'm the provost here at UK. You know, about a year ago, our Board of Trustees approved a very lofty and ambitious strategic plan. And as part of that plan, we had 5 goals. One was undergraduate student success, graduate education, diversity and inclusion, research and scholarship, and community engagement. And really today, I would argue that we're here to discuss a topic that impacts at least 3 of those, and maybe more, and that's inclusion in the classroom. Because that our students feeling a sense of belonging and a sense of welcomeness, both here on the campus as a whole, but also in the classroom, is so important. And so they need to feel like it's a place where they belong, because we believe that's one of the 4 pillars of student success, is belonging, and hopefully which leads to engagement. And part of it is that you as faculty in the classroom are also part of that engagement. You know, if you look at the Gallup surveys, particularly the Gallup Purdue survey, and you look at the top 4 reasons that students state that their college education is valuable, they are faculty, 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 and faculty, or issues related to faculty. One of the key ones is that faculty engaged me in the classroom and brought me into the classroom as part of that work. One of them is that a faculty member reached out to me and encouraged me to pursue my dreams. A third one is that faculty involved me in their work and their research. So those are 3 of those top things, and it involves faculty making that key linkage with the students. And the Center for Enhancement of Learning and Teaching is one of those key components here on campus that really helps us with that engagement. We have physical environment, and I would argue that this is a beautiful physical environment for a classroom. And I hope you would say the same thing. But that's only half of the equation. The second half of the equation is, I'll call it the social or learning environment created by the faculty member. You can have a beautiful facility, but if the faculty member does not create that learning environment for the students, optimal learning is not going to occur. So you have to have the 2 together. And so we have a very distinguished panel with us today from the Center for Enhancement of Learning and Teaching to really lead this discussion on inclusion in the classroom. And so I'm going to read a little bit about their bios so I don't miss anything about them. But I want to tell you and introduce you to the 3 people that you're going to be working with today. The first is Deb Castiglione here, and Deb is earned her doctorate in distance learning from the University of Kentucky. She brings her skills and knowledge and experience in instructional design and development, and particularly universal design, accessibility, and assistive technology. Those students who may need adaptations to help them with their learning, and Deb is an expert in that. She's also a resident certified assistive technology professional and has worked with children and adults with disabilities. Again, that's part of our inclusive campus, is making all students feel welcome, but also give them the opportunity to learn. She's developed a number of courses in distance education, instructional design, assistive technology, and universal design for learning. And her passion really is about incorporating accessibility and universal design into learning for everyone. Our second panel member today is Nicole Martin, Dr. Nicole Martin, and the newest member of the panel. I've been here about 6 months, since May. And she's a faculty instructional consultant at the Center for Enhancement of Learning and Teaching here at UK. She completed her doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin in performance studies with an emphasis in critical race theory. Nicole co-leads the self-workshop series, Critical Conversations about Race in Teaching, and I think there's going to be one next week. So I would encourage you all to attend that. They'll be sending out some announcements. And so that's something important for us as well. She's also currently co-producing a podcast mini-series on race in higher education called Higher Justice. And last but not least is Ashley Sorrell, who's a PhD candidate, and hopefully it's next week you're going to defend?
Friday,
yes. So she's a little nervous. Understandable.
A little stressed.
She's a faculty instructional consultant herself as well, and a PhD candidate in the Department of History. She was the recipient of the 2014 Provost Outstanding Teaching Award for Teaching Assistants. In her role itself, she co-leads CELT's workshop series, Critical Conversations about Race and Teaching with Nicole. and supports initiatives around teaching assistant training and development. Please join me in welcoming this group for a conversation about inclusion in the classroom.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. I feel confident that I can speak on behalf of Ashley and Deb and say that we're really excited to be here. We spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about, and engaging around this idea of inclusion, which is a massive project and incredibly personal. And so we believe that our job, both if we're teaching classes or supporting people who teach classes, is to make sure that we encourage practices that allow our students to be fully present without feeling like they have to silo parts of their identity just to feel like they have access to the space. We also believe that students, what's critical to students is creating an inclusive classroom environment because it's important to both their development as students in their educational development, as well as their development as civic citizens and their position as global thought leaders. So one of the things that we've noticed when it comes to this idea of diversity and inclusion, because it's so huge, we end up like breaking it down into its component parts. So we talk about race, and then we talk about gender, and then we talk about class and socioeconomics, and to a lesser extent, disability and veterans and accessibility. So I think part of what's driving our excitement today is that this conversation that we're having and our ability to lead this particular workshop is really rare. Because when we think about the word diversity and inclusion, especially as it relates to disability, what we're finding is that it's rare that disability is included in that institutional definition of diversity. So today is really an opportunity for us to begin modeling and practicing what it looks like to hold all of these different components of inclusion, diversity together in a single conversation. So again, really thank you for being here.
Our clicker thing is important. So as we start to think about inclusive teaching, the question, probably a common question is, what is inclusive teaching? Why is it important, and what does it look like? We hope to show what it looks like as we go through the presentation today. But why is it important? If we think about what Provost Tracy told us as far as UK strategic plan, making the campus more inclusive is a core tenet of that strategic plan. Also, inclusive teaching practices have become more central in how we think about teaching and learning as the undergraduate student population has diversified across campuses nationwide. At UK, we have approximately, and the pros can tell me if I'm wrong, this is from 2015, approximately 15, a little bit over 15% underrepresented students here at the University of Kentucky, about the same number of first-generation students as well.
And we have the undergraduate students that have reported having a disability here are 7%, which is lower than the national average. It's 11%. But the thing to really be concerned about is 75% of the students that had accommodations and assistance in high school do not disclose having a disability when they come to college. So there are a large number of students out there with some form of disability that we don't know about.
So with such a population of students with such diverse backgrounds and for some challenges in their first year of college, we want to create an inclusive learning environment, which at its core means a feeling of belonging in the learning environment. Also a feeling of connectedness with each other and with the instructor, and respect for each other and for the instructor as well. Because research has found when students feel isolated and marginalized, as maybe in this integration model, which is where a lot of this started, diversity as being just about numbers instead of including these students into the whole of the classroom experience, that can lead to a feeling of marginalization and isolation, which has a severe impact on the students' motivation to learn. So inclusive teaching is about should be about us as instructors thinking how we can be inclusive in our content, in our pedagogy, and also in our social and learning environments.
And to add to that, especially the way that Ashley just set it up, inclusion, we're moving more away from inclusion as a thing, as a noun, and toward inclusion as a verb, as an action, as a doing, as a practice, as an intentional commitment to enacting behaviors that create change. So that's like the big frame and how we're like engaging and working through inclusion today.
And because we are CELT and we do workshops and make people participate, we're gonna start with a discussion. We say tables because we're used to working with tables, but if you can just discuss with those around you at your seat, this is kind of maybe interrogating some of the unconscious bias, which is an initiative UK. Okay, let's look at this question together. What did your groups discuss as far as your own assumptions and how these might shape your interactions with students? What's an assumption you discussed and the impact of that? Yes.
We had several really great conversations, but one that came to mind immediately is this cliche, this misnomer we've heard over the years from even parents I'm friends with when they say, oh, my child's not the college type, or that student's not the college type. I think sometimes that assumption is based sometimes it's just by seeing someone.
Right.
And they tend to be underrepresented.
Right.
As well.
So the student who's quote unquote not the college type then goes to college,
Yes.
let's say, and is in the classroom. How might that shape the teacher's interaction or the instructor's interaction if she too believes, right?
Yeah.
So
That teacher may not interact with that student as much as they would someone that's perceived to be college type.
right, and then think about the impact that might have on the student and their learning. Anyone else?
student needs by looking at them.
Mhm.
Like, oh, this is someone in those categories, I know what those categories are, so they probably need a lot of help, or don't need a lot of help, just by kind of what categories are they in, okay, now I know what they need.
Right.
Yeah, that was, they may need help, was something we talked about here. But Lisa, you should share your story you told us.
Please.
Get it, Lisa.
I went out to dinner last week with a particular student. She said that she was in class, African American student, and the instructor asked them to get into small groups, and no one really wanted to work with her. And so she went up to one group and was like, okay, yeah, you can work with us. And the instructor said, well, how do you feel about that? And so the student said she felt reduced to tears. She didn't say that in front of the class. She said she just wanted to cry. She's like, okay, I'm just going to work by myself. I don't want to work with anyone else. And so that was very troubling to hear. And I didn't really have an answer for her other than to say, it's not your fault. It has nothing to do with you. She's a very intelligent young lady. She's just African American.
Yeah, and imagine how isolating that must have been for her, you know? And that's common.
Oh, I was just going to say how, as a young professor, I had to learn that from my African American students, not to say to people, just gather with a group around you, because my African American students, one semester I had like a majority of African American students, and they said, faculty do that all the time, and they don't understand that, especially for black men, people will go to the extreme to not be in a small group with black men. So the women were saying they often get with their African American male peers because they know other people won't want to be in a group with them. And as a white person, I had just never realized that. I thought I was just doing active learning, right? But actually, I was creating a process by which some people were excluded by the way I threw out the assignment.
That also shows up a lot with our international students, not only from the instructor perspective of, like, if they're wanting to participate in class, giving them that time to formulate their thought, be able to articulate it, not just, yep, oh, good answer, and moving on to someone who they're going to be able to have that better conversation with. But also in groups, a lot of times the students are like, really, I have to be in this group, I'm just going to have to do the work for that student instead of being engaged with them and giving them that extra opportunity and providing those resources to really come together as a strong team.
That's a good point. I think we were actually talking, I was planning this workshop, you know, the importance of choosing groups as part of inclusive teaching, because you do get instances of either the African American students being left out, the international students. But we realized, at least Nicole and I, that sometimes, you know, we say in class, okay, turn around and talk to someone behind you. But thinking about students who are disabled, you know, so that's not something you can say, right? So there's still things that you do that are in your everyday lexicon, you know, that have to be cognizant of within the class.
We had something that we talked about in terms of our own assumptions, that it is partly generational. So I feel like I've been a faculty member so long, and when I came of age, we didn't really have accommodations for disabilities. So then as a faculty member, when at some point in the 1990s these letters started showing up, I was like, what is this? And I wonder if my, you know, the fact that, you know, I went through school without knowing anybody who had accommodations, if I have a kind of sort of unexamined assumption about it, like, what, you need more time? You know, if I haven't always responded in the most supportive way for the student. And we hear that a lot from our students, like somebody had a paper, gave the paper, and the faculty member like waved the paper at them, right? We had that happen recently in class, so.
Following up on that, I have some assumptions that I even probably justify about accommodations as well. So I teach in engineering, and I understand extra time, and I'm going to be really honest with a lot of people that I don't know about these assumptions. So with extra time, I understand all that, but sometimes I think about it in my head, fairness to other students, because I'm also thinking about, in the event of something really important and if something catastrophic is about to happen, someone needs to be able to make a reasoned assumption quickly. So I'm thinking, wow, so it would be really nice, and do levy because I'm a little uncomfortable about being quite this open about it. But while it'd be really nice if we could go, yep, don't fail just yet, just take, but so I have that, and I think I wrestle with that. I give the students the extra time, I have no problem with it, but I know in my head, I'm kind of thinking, how are we setting them up for later, in the workplace or whatever, or at least that's going in my head. I don't know if that makes it any better, right, or what have you, but that, I struggle with that a lot, particularly when I have like up to 10% of my students, I'm thinking, wow, that might have that particular kind of accommodation. So, twice as much time, I'm thinking, well, yeah, so that's mine.
Thank you. You want to move on to our next question? So we want to look at interventions as well. So in this question, what teaching practices have you incorporated, or for those who are instructors, are you aware of, maybe if you could think back to experience you had in class, that help create an inclusive learning environment, that there's a feeling of belonging and connectedness and respect, and a feeling of, I know this is kind of a controversial word now, safety, to be able to express your opinions and be able to discuss.
Take about 3 to 5 minutes just to talk with your groups on that.
Provide content for 20 minutes on some channel.
Something where it's
Talk about it in class, and I try to get it
that you think are effective, perhaps effective interventions or ways in which to create an inclusive learning environment. Anything? There's lots of discussion. I know there's some. Yes, Carla.
Sure, I'll start, and then I think we can add in others from this group. We were talking about starting at the very beginning from day one of class, creating that environment of respect, but also creating not barriers but boundaries within the class, and letting the students know that this is a safe place to be, but also there are specific expectations of what is okay, maybe what isn't, and then really talking about how we can be connected, and then building on that bit by bit over the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of class. So you're not just saying, okay, everybody get in your groups, we're going to be inclusive now, right? That you have to build that respect, build that community of the class. Everything from little think, pair, shares to putting things on the board, finding areas where our students have more in common with each other as opposed to differences, and where those differences are, really kind of pulling that out and looking at the pros and cons, and that kind of ties into what you were talking about with ethics, if you wanted to kind of share a little bit of what you do in that class.
Sure. Well, I trained music therapists, and so within our ANTA Code of Ethics, diversity is part of it, social justice is part of our advanced training curriculum, and so I try to incorporate discussions about ethics as it relates to diversity throughout the curriculum. And one thing I thought was starting with that earlier, really, we can relate that to what we're talking about in the classroom and then how they practice those in the classroom. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and if you would talk a little bit about what you were saying with the step, I think that really ties in also.
Outside of the university, I volunteer with this program called Step by Step for young single mothers, low socioeconomic backgrounds, different races and ethnicities. And so we form an inclusive culture where we get together as a larger group. We do trust exercises and games so that they can bond, be able to establish a rapport. And then we break them down into smaller groups. And so when they meet with me in the small groups, we set boundaries, rules, and regulations, making sure that this is a safe haven. Some of these young ladies have come from abusive relationships, or they may have been sexually abused, or experimenting with drugs. And so we make sure that they know that whatever that they share in this room stays in this room, and they're able to form friendships out of this. Sometimes the relationships may be combative because they're dating or involved with the same person, but we create that safe space and make it available for them to be able to talk, and no judgment calls whatsoever. We're just here to support you, and they're free to be whoever they are. And even though this is like a faith-based organization, we understand that these young ladies come from different backgrounds, so the language that they use may not be the language that we use, and so we still listen to them. We go to court with them, we go to the hospital with them. Some of them have, left the program and actually enrolled in UK and other institutions of higher learning or BCTC, things like that.
And I think that really hits an important point that's part of inclusive teaching too, and that's creating an environment where students can be their authentic selves, right? And so you're allowing the space for these women to be their authentic selves, right? So creating that same type of atmosphere for students so they can express, who they are, and they're not coming to the classroom and having to, it's not effective, but leaving who they are at the door.
I think for us, really building and maintaining those connections is kind of that theme.
Good. Great. Thank you guys so much. Over here.
Well, you were talking about using the poll everywhere to try to give students who were not going to be comfortable speaking in front of 90 other students. So.
Yeah.
She's
So you pose like poll questions for them to answer as well?
I do that sometimes, and I also have more open-ended, and sometimes they're not just in class, but sort of what questions will you have? Because what they will all do is they will come in a line at the end, or they will come in office hours, and so I'll just sort of, what are the questions now? And there are 2 or 3 that who will raise their hands or not wait and just have a running conversation all the time, but I know there are others that have questions, so.
That's a
Just
great
let it-
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could ask the questions during class.
That's a lot of what we talked about too, is all the different reasons why somebody may need a different way to respond or more time to respond. And so creating that variety to kind of touch on everybody's needs.
Absolutely.
All right, but today we're going to talk about another teaching practice.
It tries to touch on everybody's needs.
Yes. It's called Universal Design for Learning. How many of you have heard about Universal Design for Learning? Good. Great. Also referred to it as UDL throughout the presentation. But basically, UDL is a framework for addressing the variability on college campuses today that benefits all students. It comes to us from the field of architecture. A gentleman named Ron Mace coined the term universal design in the 1980s. And basically, universal design is designing all environments, products, services, or technology. And this could also include education, but I think of education as some products and services. So they can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by everyone. And that is regardless of the characteristics that somebody might bring to the table: age, ability, disability. And that's without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So you want to look at the broadest range of individuals from the very beginning and incorporate that up front so that people don't have to overcome obstacles later. Who knows what this is? Might be hard to tell from the picture. It's actually a curb cut. Curb cut is one of the common examples used for universal design. And it was incorporated into the environment early on, the built-in environment, so that it could be used by people in wheelchairs, more easily get around the environment. How many people have taken advantage of a curb cut? And what are some reasons why you've used a curb cut?
I was on crutches.
On crutches.
Strollers.
Stroller.
Bike.
Bike. Okay.
Suitcases.
Suitcases, exactly. We all have taken advantage of the curb cut. It's benefited all of us. Here's a little cartoon. We actually have it handed out to you as well. But there's an individual in a wheelchair, and he says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And the individual shoveling comes back and says, "There's other kids waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling off the stairs, then I will shovel the ramp for you." And the individual in the wheelchair comes back and says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all use it and all get in." So another that what benefits is designed to benefit one person can benefit everybody. So what is UDL? UDL is a research-based set of principles for curriculum development. It comes to us from the neurosciences, and it's about creating equal opportunities for all individuals in learning. I referred to it earlier as a framework. It's a framework for creating instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone. It's about creating a flexible environment so students can choose the path that they can be most successful in, instead of a one-size-fits-all environment that only a few individuals can be successful in. So where do we start? We want to start with the goals. Or learning objectives. We talked a lot about learning objectives. So what are your goals for these students? What are your goals for the learners? And then, once we have our goals, we need to think about the barriers. What kinds of characteristics are the students bringing to the table? What kind of variability are they going to present that are going to cause them barriers to those goals? What we look at, after we've looked at those two things, the goals and the barriers, then we want to think about the UDL principles. And UDL is founded on three basic principles that they've designed around three parts of what they call the learning brain: the affective network, the recognition network, and the strategic network. And although they've separated these out, they all need to be addressed and they all work together to create expert learners. So when you really look at addressing the affective network, you want to do this, it's about motivating your students. And Provost Tracy talked about engagement early on, how critical it is for students and for us to provide that engagement for students in the classroom. So how do you get them motivated? Well, you can motivate them by providing them with multiple means of engagement, providing them different ways, so they can choose the way that's going to work best for them. We're not all motivated the same way. The recognition network is about presenting information, and it's how students take that information, ideas, concepts, and get it into their heads. So what are some multiple means of presenting information? How can you provide it in different ways so that it can benefit all of the students? And then the third network, the strategic network, is primarily about how students demonstrate what it is that they know and have learned. So providing them with multiple ways to demonstrate that, multiple means of action and expression, is a way to make them be more successful in the classroom and demonstrate that freedom. One of the core tenets, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, and I just want to re-emphasize it here, is what is essential for some is almost always good for all. So we talked about that with the curb cuts. We talked about that with the ramp. One example of that in a demonstration for individuals with disabilities is captioning. If you caption a video, you are going to benefit and fulfill the needs of an individual that's deaf and hard of hearing, but so many more individuals are going to benefit from that. English language learners it's going to help them increase their language abilities. If you look at individuals that might be in an environment where, let's say, auditory output is not conducive or it's inappropriate, or they may not have access to speakers, they could actually do the video and read the captions. How many of us have been in the airport in a noisy environment and you look up to see something that's happening on the screen and you read the caption because you can't really hear what's going on? So it can benefit a lot more people other than those that was actually intended to benefit. So we're going to unpack some of those multiple means, those principles a little bit more. And actually, multiple means of engagement is typically the first to be addressed. It's the most critical and it's the most important, but we decided to save the best for last. So we're going to address that last and look at multiple
Way to
means.
set us up for failure.
We're going to address the multiple means of representation first. And this gentleman's name is David Rose, and he is actually one of the co-founders of Universal Design for Learning. And he talks about in this quote that there is not one way to represent information or present information that's optimal for all learners. We need to present options for them on how they can address that information. And that's one of the key things with Universal Design for Learning, is providing options, choices, alternatives, so students can pick the path that they're going to be most successful with, or the way they're going to be most successful. So how does this look when we talk about implementing UDL from the beginning? Like I said, you want to pick your goal first. So let's say your goal is to read and comprehend text. So what are some of the potential barriers that might come up in the classroom that would prevent an individual from being able to meet that goal? You could possibly have a student with a visual impairment. More than likely, you're going to have a student with a learning disability that could have problems. They could have dyslexia. They might have problems with comprehension. You're probably going to have a student or two that have ADHD, since it's more common on college campuses all up as we move forward. You might have somebody that's got limited experiences, so they might not be able to relate to what's in the text. And you could have somebody that's an English language learner, and they also might have some problems relating to what's in the text. So once you've figured out what some of those barriers are, then you need to start thinking about what are those different options that you can provide up front so you don't have barriers and obstacles. So when we're looking at these barriers, some of the different options are first to provide audio access so somebody could listen to the text instead of reading it. Offering both a digital book and a print book. Some people are more comfortable reading on a computer screen. Some people are more comfortable, like me, I like to highlight. So I want something that's printed out that I can highlight and carry with me. So giving them options in that area. Also, including images or providing images that can help them comprehend the text that they're reading. And last, providing a video alternative that's captioned that could actually be supplementary information. So if they, if they read the text but they don't quite understand it, they can look somewhere else. A great example of this in math is Khan Academy. So if somebody doesn't quite understand, what they're reading in their math text, they could always go to Khan Academy and watch a video and try and get the same information in a different way. Or it could be if you're reading something in history, a story, and you really are having a hard time comprehending it, perhaps there's a video that gives similar content out there that you could watch so you can understand the content.
And another way of looking at multiple means of representation in the classroom from a more social or cultural angle is to think about course content. And one of the ways you can do that is by looking at what perspectives or what voices sort of dominate the course curriculum. And I teach a lot of theater and performance courses, so we talk about the theatrical canon a lot. The texts, the authors, the scholars, the ideas that shape how a person thinks about a particular field of study or discipline. And it's rare to go into a survey theater course and not hear about the Greek tragedies or Shakespeare. But if you think about Shakespeare and when his work came into prominence, there's also another theatrical form called Japanese kabuki, which was coming up into prominence at that same time, which a lot of students, a lot of people don't know about. So if we're thinking about dominant perspectives as setting the standards and the ideals for what a discipline should do, like what would theater, or how would we think about theater if our standard was Japanese kabuki, a dance lyrical form of theater, as opposed to this linear narrative that we come to recognize through Shakespeare. So when we're talking about dominant perspectives and we're challenging that, we're encouraging students to begin to complicate and trouble, what they know, how they know it, and what voices and stories matter.
Great. So similar to that is incorporating multiple perspectives and the particular topic you're teaching. So I can give you an example from history. Say I'm doing a class on society in 1950s United States. Part of what I'm focusing on is the role of women at this time. And I mentioned that after their contributions to the war effort, to the war industry in World War II, most women were expected to go back into the home, take up their roles as housewives and mothers. What's the problem with that narrative?
Assuming that they all left that
Okay,
work.
yes, yeah.
Well, mostly the same thing. I was thinking from a class perspective, there were some that,
Yeah.
sort of similar.
I'm leaving out probably the majority of the population of the United States, right? Was this a story for Black women?
No.
Was this a story for working class women? Was this a story for women who didn't identify as heterosexual, right? So by presenting that narrative, I'm marginalizing a number of people in American society and also potentially marginalizing students in my class who may identify with one of those populations that I'm leaving out in this historical narrative. Are there other ways, I want to hear from you all, that you incorporate multiple perspectives, or an example you can give in your courses? In your engineering, right?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I know. But I will think about it.
Okay.
Well, when I teach my students about the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, I also have to think about, imagine it from you're a parent or you're someone with a mental illness. Are there reasons why you might not want this diagnosis? Reasons why you might not want to be diagnosed? Are there, is there another way of looking at the DSM besides this authoritative document?
That's great. So it's, in a sense, developing that empathy too, students' empathy with different perspectives. Yeah. Also something to think about is looking at the course text you use and seeing if there are groups marginalized within that text. So if somehow the experiences of African Americans, of immigrants are blocked off as separate from the overarching analysis or separate from the story, that's marginalization within the text. You can have students look for this and point it out when they see it, but kind of challenge the way these are written. And what's it look like when we decenter the narrative from white, heteronormativity? How does that change our disciplines? topics? How does that change how we teach certain topics in our disciplines?
All right, the second principle we're going to talk about is the multiple means of action and expression, the one dealing primarily with assessment, how you find out what it is that students have learned and understand. And this is one of my favorite cartoons. You can see the instructor is saying for fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb the tree, which obviously a good majority of those animals pictured are not going to be successful in this task. So thinking about relating it back to students, a lot of times we do that, one size fits all. Here's your exam, you get the same exam to everybody, and there are going to be students that aren't going to be successful. So another example of that is, let's say the goal is to write a short perception paper. Thinking again back on what your barriers might be. Like I said, you might have, or you're more than likely going to have someone with a learning disability. You'll probably have somebody that has limited experiences, that might have some difficulty not even understanding what it means to write a perception paper. Writing might be someone's plain area of weakness. They're just not a strong writer. Or you could have someone that has a physical disability. And so one thing you need to think about is the goal actually writing a short paper, or is it creating a perception paper? Because sometimes we're dictating how they do it in the goal, so you need to separate the means from what the goal actually is. But what are some options to overcome some of those barriers? Well, you can allow a choice in topics. That way they can pick the topic that they are going to be strongest in and be most successful with, the one they know the most about. Providing examples of exemplary papers from the past, so they have a model that they can look at so they know what is expected of them. Or another example is using a rubric so they know what is expected. You outline for them pretty much what it is they need to do well on that paper. And the last one, speech to text. If an individual does not have the capabilities to type, or maybe they're just not somebody that can actually sit down and think as they're typing on the computer, they're better just talking, they could actually use voice dictation on the computer. So just talk to the computer as it dictates what it is that they're saying.
Great. So this idea of choice and assignment also is, yes, no, go ahead.
Can I ask a question on that, please? Use of a rubric would mean like provide the students the rubric.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, I do that. I let them see how I'm going to grade them. I also have provided them papers, previous papers, and, it helps some students, but other students use the material, the content. And I tell them, if you use the content out of the provided paper, I'm going to give you a very low grade at the very least. And I still have students do that. It's really kind of a conundrum, in my experience. And these are not students who have any, to my knowledge, recognizable disabilities. This is just a lack of effort on our part.
Well, and that's interesting. We talk about a software package, and we're presenting it to a lot of freshmen on campus. And it's amazing when we ask them if they knew anything about plagiarism, how many of them already were familiar with plagiarism and they had just started school. So it's kind of surprising to me that they would do something like that knowing, but I can see that it's there and they use it.
Yeah, what I'm running across more and more is just lack of effort. And I think, well, your grade reflects your lack of effort. And I'm less sympathetic to that lack of effort than I am to, other things.
But other students might find that motivating.
Yes.
I'm talking about it now as an example of action and expression, but these aren't separate categories from each other. It also is a way that some students would be more engaged and more motivated when you provide them.
Oh, yes,
with
right,
examples.
exactly. The ones who are motivated and who want to do well, I see this as additional resources. I'm sorry, you had your hand.
I was actually going to challenge something, if that's okay, that you brought us. It's just being able to, how do you identify what effort is? So that is effort in your lens, but you don't know that the student didn't feel that they did put an adequate effort. Does that make sense?
Well, when they use the material that I provided them as an example for a different topic, and it's right in there, word for word, my lens is pretty well like, here's the work. You have to do the work in order to succeed. Going back to what you talked about, are we preparing people for the world out there? And that's how I kind of frame my class. Part of my preparation is that you're going to be effective in your professional life. And so I frame it for them like that.
Yeah, so maybe the question becomes then, how can we create authentic, meaningful assignments that students will connect with and want to put the effort in, right? Yep. Or assignments that,
Well,
you know,
I agree.
yeah, assignments that students can relate to, because students use their backgrounds, experiences, beliefs, perceptions in which to construct knowledge. So how can we bring that in with our assignments? I'll give you another example. I had a student in a research methods course. She was interested, her passion fell in with the recent social justice movement at that time around Say Her Name, related to police violence against Black women. This being kind of a history course, I wanted her to engage in something historical. So she looked at the lynching of Black women in the late 19th, early 20th centuries and the silence around that, and connected that, what was going on there, to inform this recent social justice movement. So in a way, able to bridge what she knows, right, with something she would have to research and know more about in order to build that knowledge, right? So we're thinking of, how to make our assignments authentic in a way. And it's difficult, it's hard. There's some assignments I've created that have fallen flat. I thought they were exciting, engaging students, not so much. But it's, it's a process, right? Reflecting, a constant reflection of, what we've done that hasn't worked so well and how we can make it better, maybe to prevent the lifting of text. I've done assignments where students go to Wikipedia, there it is, right? So, making those more authentic in that way.
And also when we're thinking about the assessment portion of multiple means of action and expression, one of the things I like to do is get an assessment of my classroom environment. Thinking about that piece that Carlos was talking about, creating community. A simple daily check-in, especially if I have a small class, can be really helpful for sort of understanding where students are, because I think one of the things that I've been seeing in my own courses is that what's happening socially, like in the social context, is really, it's coming into the classroom and students are bringing that in, and thinking about how an inclusive classroom is about allowing students to be their full selves in that space. I think a daily check-in is wonderful. I heard about this idea from a graduate student in the sociology department. He asks his students, what's on your news feed? So you're both tapping into like the technology that they use every single day, how they use it, and then how it's affecting their daily life. So I think I would like to offer that to you as a strategy to incorporate into your own courses. And the last piece about this idea around action and expression is paying attention to the language that we use. I talked about the theatrical canon, and for some people, the theatrical canon is a completely foreign concept. So if you know or understand that there are certain terms or ideas that are going to be critical for the trajectory of your course, then make sure to provide a foundation and a grounding for everybody to be able to have the tools, the language tools, to be able to be engaged in the class content.
Okay, and our third and our most important principle, multiple means of engagement. And we were going to show a short video, but to save some time, we're not going to show it. But basically, in this video, there are students rolling their eyes. There's a student that ends up drooling. It's one of the main things you don't want to happen in your class. So you want to provide a motivating classroom environment. So how can we do that? Let's say our goal is an online discussion. We'll go back, we'll think about our barriers. You might have somebody that is very shy and insecure. You could have, again, somebody with a learning disability. And then you might have somebody that's got limited technology skills. So what are some different options that you can put out there, some multiple means of engagement that you can provide to these students so they can all be successful in your class? Well, one could be provide a choice of discussion topics. Again, they can pick what they're most familiar with, what they're going to feel like they're going to be stronger and more successful with. You could do a variety of different discussions instead of doing a question answer all the time. Do something more fun, maybe competitive, or do like a debate. Some students might find that more engaging. Clearly communicate expectations, making sure that you've provided enough information on what's appropriate in etiquette to provide that safe environment for that shy and insecure student so they feel comfortable reaching out there and saying something they might not say in another environment. And then you could also provide a tutorial or provide a link to a tutorial that demonstrates how you actually go in and post to a discussion board or respond to a discussion. So somebody that doesn't have that experience can get familiar with it before they actually have to do it.
So what if your goal is to engage students in discussion in the class? How can you do this in an effective way? I'm not going to spend too much time on this because the exceptional folk over here already mentioned much of what I would say. But I can't probably speak enough to the value of collaborative groups. It has served me very well as an instructor, as a way to get students to communicate cross-culturally, to feel comfortable if you have that shy, insecure student, to give that student the courage and comfort in which he or she can then speak up in class with kind of her cohort behind her, him or her, right? So I really, really love the use of collaborative groups. But as we mentioned, it's important that we choose the groups as instructors for fear that a student may get left out. And also, you know, it helps you think about, you know, drawing students' strengths and weaknesses, to make the groups as diverse as possible when you're creating them. And as Carla mentioned, a key to making these groups work, a key to making a classroom discussion, particularly around perhaps a heated topic work, is to develop those class norms on at least within the first week, right? Because developing those norms helps create an atmosphere where the students feel safe or brave enough to speak up, and also an atmosphere of mutual respect and community.
Okay, what is one voice, all ears?
Oh, so one person talks at a time,
Oh, okay.
and everybody listens, Kevin.
We have about 10 minutes left in this session, and we'd really like to spend some time working through, let me reverse. When we're thinking about creating an inclusive classroom space, we're asking our students and we're asking ourselves to be able to step into a brave space, safe space, a brave space, right? And there are always potential challenges that come up with that. And I think that's why a lot of people feel hesitancy to have the conversations that need to be had in the classroom environment. Who's at risk? Who's going to get shut down? Who's going to cause commotion? So I'd like to take the last 10 minutes of the session to work through a case study problem. In your packet, there are 3 case studies, but we will spend our time on this first one, caught off guard. There's a scenario. We'd like you to take a minute to read the scenario, and then in the groups that you've been working in throughout the session, if you could start to work through the first 2 questions in the list of questions below. And we'll take about 5 or so minutes to discuss, and then we'll take the last 5 minutes to come back together. You could take about just like one more minute, that would be great.
I know many of you.
But had the courage to do it. All right, I don't want to break up the conversation, but I do want to take a minute to bring us all back together to talk about the scenario. So let's get to it. What are your thoughts and feelings on the situation, this case study, based on real life?
This is based on real life.
This is what we all fear, right? This is why we try to avoid but issues. So it's very scary to consider that this might pop up.
Yeah, so the thought is, this is exactly what I was afraid of.
Right.
Yeah,
I knew this would happen.
I knew this would happen.
Yeah.
Oh, so here we go.
Brace, yeah.
What is my department gonna think of me bringing this up? And, you know, who else is gonna hear about this?
Right, what's the backlash to all of this? Right. What else, what other thoughts or feelings are running through your brain?
How do I regain control of the class?
Right, it's out of control, I need to step in and grab it. Yeah, exactly. So knowing that all of those things are running through your head all at the same time, what is your response? What do you do? What did you come up with?
This is actually I can speak to this, not this specific example,
Yeah.
but this scenario actually happens rather frequently in the classes that I teach. I teach communication classes, so I kind of am in the crosshairs a little more than maybe some other disciplines, maybe not. One of the first things I try and do is, first of all, validate that the student is saying, hey, this is happening, these are the different labels that they're putting on this. Validate that that's there. Maybe not necessarily like we were saying, don't really agree with it, but say, I get it, this is happening. Let's see if we can figure out where this is coming from. And one of the ways to do that is try and de-escalate that initial visceral emotional response to it. And one
good way to do that is go back to the text. That will shut them down very quickly. Where does this come from in the class? No, that's fair, okay? But, where is this coming from? Where is this coming from a societal perspective or a personal perspective? And so, again, going back to, I really appreciate the conversation that we're having. Let's just remember that we need to be respectful with each other's comments and how this is coming across. So that's one piece. The second piece is I will be very honest, a lot of times it doesn't work. The conversation will just keep right on going. And at that point, sometimes I'll say, okay, we've got some really good ideas here. I can tell there's a lot that you're thinking about. Let's take 2 to 3 minutes and write about it. That shuts down the verbal conversation. And then they have, again, it's validating that those ideas are there. It gives them a different way to get those ideas out. And then from there, a lot of times I'll start putting stuff on the board and we'll kind of try and unpack it that way. This usually gets us completely derailed from whatever I was trying to talk about with class, right? And so, yeah, at that point, a lot of times the discussion, I will continue it after class in a discussion board, in an announcement, in a wiki, some other way. Again, looking at different ways that students can be involved. Does it always work? No. Does it drain me? Absolutely. But again, trying to de-escalate that emotional response and come back to, oh my gosh, what is the department going to say? That we try to come back to the content of what we were trying to cover in those learning objectives for the day. Yeah, it's a little pie in the sky, but I'd say I got a better than 50-50 shot at it, some of it working at least.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Those are like the precise steps that we talk about. Disassociate the idea from the student. It's so important that you table the comment. So put it someplace where we can all critically analyze the comment or the behavior and make larger links back to how we are conditioned to think, or how other groups are conditioned to think and act and respond in a similar way. Also, everyone being able to de-escalate the situation. I use, similar to Carla, 1 minute paper. So take out paper, write for 1 minute, go, put it all on the paper. Sometimes I'll ask to collect it. It can be anonymous, but I ask to collect it mostly because I want to know. Because if they're triggered, I'm probably triggered as well. And that gives me something to look back on when I go and reflect out and can bring it back to the classroom. Because something that we notice with these types of comments and behaviors is that it has to be addressed. You cannot just let it happen. You have to respond to it. So that is it's building the tool for me to be able to come back and respond to it later. And Carla's third point, the last part.
Taking it out of the class, continuing it beyond the end of the class discussion.
Right, and also feeling emboldened to be able to pause for a minute and come back, talk about it with the student or students who are involved is perfectly reasonable and necessary if that's what it comes down to. We are at time, I'm noticing that. Again, thank you all so much for being here. I want to take a moment to shamelessly plug our event for next Tuesday afternoon, where we will actually talk about the difficult conversation, spend a whole hour and 15 minutes, 30 minutes talking about it. If you need information, feel free to email any of us and we can send you the link for registration. And thanks so much all.